Hello, everyone. We're so excited for you to join us for our first pandemic parenting exchange. My name is Victoria. I am the digital content producer for pandemic parenting, working with Amanda and Lindsay. And I will be in the background answering Q&A questions and also in the chat if you need any technical support. A few things up front. If you have any questions for Dr. Zalahesky and Dr. Malloy, you can drop those in the Q&A, and we're hoping to have time at the end to get to some of them, that we realize we may not have time for all of them. We also are going to be recording this, and so if you miss something, if you missed one of the links or the sources that they mentioned, you can come back to it later, and we'll also publish links to all, or some of the resources on our website after this. Okay, so your videos and audio will remain muted the whole time, so don't worry about if we can hear you, we can't. So that's where you can leave all your questions in the Q&A. We want to thank our sponsor, Focus Forward Media, for sponsoring this webinar. Focus Forward Media is a Rhode Island-based production and advertising company focused on growing your business using their expertise and digital tools. They specialize in video production, photography, branding, and social media. Let their expert team of production professionals be your media department. With 10+ years experience, their specialists will work alongside you to help maximize your return while providing you the quality content you need. So with that, I want to introduce Dr. Amanda Zalahesky. She is a clinical and forensic psychologist and an associate professor of psychology at Valparaiso University. And also Dr. Lindsay Malloy. She is a developmental and forensic psychologist and an associate professor at Ontario Tech University. You can read more about them and their backgrounds on our website. With that, I'll turn it over to Amanda.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Thank you everybody for being here. Before we kick this off, I just want to give a huge thanks to Victoria. You can't imagine the work she's been doing behind the scenes. And so I think she's going to drop her LinkedIn link in the chat. And if you ever need help with web development or social media, she really does everything for everyone. And so we highly encourage you to check her out. She's been an immense help to us. So we're so excited to be here, right, Lindsay?
Absolutely.
Yes. And so Lindsay and I will be jumping in to answer some questions in a minute. But the first thing we want to do, we're really excited to introduce you to Dr. Ruthie Speidel. And part of the reason, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Ruthie in just a second, but one of the things that Lindsay and I were most excited to do in these pandemic parenting exchanges was to really use this opportunity to amplify emerging scholars, up-and-coming rock stars in the field, and Ruthie is most definitely one of those. And so we're just so thrilled to have her here with us today to moderate this session and share some of her expertise as well. So let me just tell you about Ruthie. She received her PhD in developmental psychology from the University of Notre Dame, fellow Domer, go Irish. And she'll soon be starting a postdoc with Dr. Tina Malti at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. Her work focuses on early family processes, including emotion socialization behaviors during parent-child interactions, and their implications for child emotion and self-regulation, particularly within adverse family environments and in the context of early trauma. In addition, she is interested in how research can be applied to inform interventions aimed at ameliorating negative developmental trajectories in children and families who experience adversity. So you can see why we thought her expertise was perfect to join us today. And again, we're just so glad to have her here. So thank you, Ruthie, for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to you. You got to unmute.
Whoops. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I'm super excited for our discussion this evening. So to kind of just kick us off and get us started, what is it that sparked your decision to start Pandemic Parenting and this webinar series?
Yeah, so Lindsay and I were both simultaneously doing research studies. I think that when the pandemic started coming, or we saw that it was coming, we both were sort of freaking out a little bit and, did what we know how to do best, which is to study it, study our own anxiety and what was maybe going on with other families similar to ours. So I quickly pulled together a study that was looking at parent stress and the impact of the pandemic and essentially quarantining and social distancing on children's emotional and behavioral functioning. And we studied about 450 or so families. We were able to follow them over about 4 months, and I'll be talking about some of those results today. Lindsay, you want to tell them about yours?
Yes. So same situation. We launched our study right at the kind of start of the pandemic sort of hitting North America. And so we were focused on emotional, socio-emotional well-being among kids and families, but also our specific focus is on how parents are talking to their kids about COVID-19 and or are they not talking to them about it and how that might play out. So we have data from March to May, and then we're doing a 6-month follow-up soon. So we're excited to look at that.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're going to be talking next time all about some of those ideas and themes around talking to kids. So we're excited to hear that. So we both were doing these studies, and just for background, Lindsay and I have actually never met in person. So we both are members of the American Psychology Law Society, go to the conference every year, and we're familiar with each other's work, but mostly only had ever interacted over social media and realized that we were studying similar things. So we chatted a few weeks ago, and we're feeling like, man, we're both learning things from these studies. We're about to enter round 2 of this, potentially, with the school year starting and none of us really knowing what's going to happen with school, or really just what to do in this second wave. And so we're also kind of restless and frustrated with the research process, which can often take sometimes many years to actually publish your findings. So I know we were feeling like we're learning some stuff now that can really help parents potentially in real time. And so wanted to try to figure out a way to do that. So you want to talk a little bit about how we ended up here tonight?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Amanda reached out and said, I have this idea, and this is a way we could maybe reach parents, and I mean, it all just happened very, very quickly. And Victoria has been amazing getting us set up to be able to do this. We did not see ourselves doing this. It's not like we didn't have a few other things in parenting during this pandemic ourselves, but we're really excited to be able to get research into the hands of people who can actually use it, because a lot of times we publish things and there and 4 people read them or what have you. So we're excited to be able to talk with parents and also learn from parents. So here we are. We just have a couple things to remind you of. So this is not sort of individual therapy, individual advice. Everyone's situation is very different. There are a lot of moving parts and a lot of different family and individual factors to think about. So we are not trying to tell people, specifically what to do in their own lives. There's also a lot of layers of privilege at play here that we're cognizant of even sort of being able to make this choice of whether to send kids to school. And so we definitely don't want to tell you what the right thing is to do. I mean, I'd love to actually be able to tell you that. I sincerely wish somebody would be able to. I'm actually in the thick of making this decision right now for our own family. So I wish there was some sort of authoritative voice that could come along and say, this is the right decision for you to make, because that would make things a lot easier. But and we can't do that for you either, unfortunately, but we do have a lot of information that we will hopefully be helpful, that's based on psychological science and in terms of decision making and other key areas when we're thinking about this stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. And I just want to give one disclaimer, which may shock everybody that is listening. We are not perfect parents by any stretch. We make a lot of mistakes, and half the time we don't follow our own advice. So just to sort of be clear that we're muddling through this right along with you. And, I know that there are some things that we just take for granted sometimes, maybe because of our training or research backgrounds, but we forget to use those things too. And so just want you to know that we're here to share what we can as far as information and experience, but we are making mistakes all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, well, so on that note, I heard you guys mentioning making decisions, and during this time, it's really been pretty hard there are a lot of decisions that people are facing. So what is making it especially hard for parents to make decisions right now during the current pandemic? And are there any concepts from psychology that might be relevant to difficulties that families might be facing right now?
I can start. So yeah, I don't know about the rest of you, but this is exhausting. This has felt exhausting for me from the first moment for a variety of reasons. I mean, it's physically exhausting, but it's just emotionally taxing. And part of the reason we think that is happening is because all day long, every day. There's just so much we're having to decide. And for me, it felt like on a day-to-day basis, once I realized my kids were going to be home all day, I was still having to work from home. My husband was still having to work from home, and we were having to facilitate our children's remote learning. I was triaging constantly. Like, it felt like every 10 minutes, what's the thing I have to do right now? Like, what is the fire to put out right now? I couldn't think in the way that I usually could. And I just started having a really hard time making decisions. They felt paralyzing, even simple decisions. So this is a concept known as decision fatigue. And it's something that it's a term that was originally coined by social psychologist Roy Baumeister. And essentially, it's a deterioration of our ability to make good decisions or weariness after a long period of decision making. And so when Lindsay and I are going to talk about some of these concepts tonight, I just want to let you know too that Victoria will be putting a lot of articles and resources and things in the chat. So you can find some of these things or people or articles we're referencing, but they'll also be on our website, like she mentioned. So just wanted to let you know. So yeah, Dr. Baumeister coined this notion of decision fatigue. And basically, when we are traumatized, which I think Lindsay and I would both argue that this is a type of collective trauma we're experiencing right now at different levels. But when we're traumatized or at a minimum experiencing extreme stress, we lose our ability to generate creative solutions. It's hard to decide that even the very simple things that we're used to deciding. So we're seeing parents and friends of ours all over social media and in our group text with fellow parent friends using words like drained, paralyzed, blocked. Like, we can't make simple decisions about things like what should I make for dinner? What should I do next? I have this long to-do list. Should I have my kids do their e-learning first or their 57 hours of screen time that it's probably going to turn into today? Like, how do we just make these choices that we're used to doing? So things like tackling work tasks can bring us to tears. They certainly did for me. It was like, well, I just can't figure out what to do. There's somebody interrupting me constantly. I can't even triage what I need to do at times. So if you are also experiencing this kind of fatigue, we just want you to know that you're not alone. And there is this psychological concept to explain it, that you're taxed in these really difficult and complex ways, and our brains and levels of concentration just can't handle it. And so that's one piece of it, is this fatigue at making decisions.
Lindsay, what do you think? Are there any particular concepts from psychology that come to mind when thinking about decision fatigue and decision-making processes that parents are going through right now?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot myself about a concept called cognitive load or mental load. And, you could give a whole lecture on this, which I'm obviously not going to do. Kind of think about information processing and how we process information. And we have our sensory memory, our working memory in the middle, and our long-term memory. And typically information is processed in our kind of working memory, that middle bit. And our working memory is a limited capacity system. So we only have, the capacity, the ability to kind of hold or work on about 5 to 9 chunks or pieces of information at a time. So it's really hard for us to kind of do more than that, to have like these, like I said, 5 to 9 pieces of information, things to think about. And we're constantly bombarded with incoming sensory information, especially right now. New information, there's lots of and it seems like there's new information about COVID-19 every day, and we're constantly reading it, seeing it, what it means, and we're balancing these parenting responsibilities and work responsibilities. So our cognitive load, our mental load, is very high right now. It's constantly high. There doesn't seem to be any reprieve from it. And then it's something that drains us emotionally. See it going on. Often moms to be the person who is thinking about everything that needs to be done and holding that in your mind, but you're also thinking about those 7 to 10 things that need to be done in the background, and oh, it's getting cold and I better order a snowsuit soon, everything like that constantly going on. So we're already so cognitively overloaded, and then you have this pressing decision about schools weighing on you. And so that's been something I've been thinking about a lot, a cognitive load, and how, especially not in every family, but typically it's moms who are bearing more of that.
Yeah. So, yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was a little glitchy in there, but I think we got everything you were trying to say. And so it might be just either of us need to turn off our cameras at time, but I think we heard most of it. It was just toward the end when you were saying, like, there's all these other things we have to consider, just in our day-to-day life, but now layering on top of it a lot of these decisions we're having to make, and we can only hold so much in our minds.
So are there certain conditions where people tend to experience more cognitive load or decision fatigue when making decisions?
Yeah, and you can interrupt me if am I breaking up still, or?
No, it's good now. I'm going to go ahead and stop my video.
Sorry about that, and I was just rambling on. So yeah, there's a few things that make decisions more difficult to make, and then may also lead to more judgment errors. So experiencing cognitive load. So, when you're multitasking, when your cognitive load is high, decision making is more difficult. When you have conditions of uncertainty, so when you're not sure what the outcome will be, which is pretty much, we're learning so much new information about it.
Turn off your camera, Lindsay, just for a minute, because I think that might help. It's breaking up a little bit. Yeah.
Sorry.
There we
is
go.
That better?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. Okay. So conditions of uncertainty, when you're under time pressure, so you have a deadline to make a certain decision, and when you're under all of us the last few months.
Yeah. So are there any kind of tangible tips or strategies that you guys might be able to offer that people could try to use to combat or kind of limit decision fatigue and cognitive load when making these big decisions and making them feel kind of less intimidating and like more approachable?
Let me just give an example, because I think as Lindsay was describing that, I just want to maybe give an example that might help people know what we mean by that. And so there's this great article that we're going to post that's called 5 Minutes in a Mom's Head by Bunmi Ladatan. And I remember when this article was first published, I read it and shared it with my husband. And, essentially, she's going through and describing what it's like to be in a mom's head, right? And so, for example, it'll just be, I wonder if those clothes still fit my kid. And well, if they don't, will he be embarrassed? And does that mean he's going to grow up to be a psychopath? And what if the kids aren't nice to him? And this like rabbit hole we go down. And I shared the article with my husband, and he read it and looked at me like, this is kind of a stretch, right? This isn't accurate. And I said, it is spot on. That is what it's like to be in my head all the time. And he said, oh gosh, I feel so bad for you guys. And so like, that's what we mean by this cognitive load, that some of the research does suggest that it happens more for moms than it does for dads. And certainly that was the reaction from my husband of, wow, if this is what it's like to be in a mom's head, I'm really sorry about that. But it's balancing all of that we maybe typically do in addition to a pandemic and all these other decisions we have to make. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of give that example and see if that resonates with people around what this cognitive load might feel like.
Definitely.
So Lindsay was going to solve it for us.
I was going to jump in and give a couple other tips if you can hear me okay.
Yep.
Or give a couple other examples. And I think Victoria is going to put a few things in the chat as well. Like there's a great and he gives some great tips. But they talk about, emotion regulation and making decisions when you're distracted, when you're hungry, when you're tired, when you're upset. And this comes up when it comes to some of the work that I do when it comes to police interrogations, right? So that's a situation that's very stressful, that there are certain rules about people, you can't question them when they're, sleep deprived or and that's related to the fact that we make very poor decisions in that kind of state. So I don't know if you want to add anything there, Amanda.
Yeah, it was just making me think in our forensic world, we have a lot of examples like this, right? Like you said, of interrogations. There was a famous study done in 2011 by Danziger and colleagues. It was called the Hungry Judge Study. And so in that study, they studied a group of Israeli judges and their positive versus negative decisions related to parole throughout the course of the day, so at different points in the day. And in the early morning, when everybody was bright and fresh, like 65% or so of the decisions were favorable to the defendant. But just before breaks for lunch, they went down to 0. And so the authors of that study argued that this has to do with our cognitive depletion, right? That once you're refueled and rested, you're going to make better decisions. So there have been some criticisms, certainly in our field, of the methodology and interpretations in that study, but I think it's interesting that, essentially they highlighted this notion of what you're describing, Lindsay, and what Baumeister called as, ego depletion, like this idea that we don't make good decisions when we're not at our best. And boy, are we not at our best right now. It's hard to find what is our best. So yeah, I think that's another example of where that comes up.
I think there's a couple like very simple little things that you can do. Try to limit the number of decisions you have to make in a day. Just very simple things can be taxing and lead to that decision fatigue and seem impossible. So, establishing routines, meal planning so that you don't have to think about what you're going to make for dinner today. I've joked with my husband, like, I can't believe these kids have to eat every day, like multiple times a day. And, if doing some meal planning or, picking out what you're going to do with them the day before, because that's another thing. We have these limited options. Routines for the kids. So, I kind of rolled my eyes initially at these homeschool schedules that came out, 2 days after the pandemic hit. But wow, when I instituted a schedule of sorts anyway, me too, with not having to decide and kind of feeling exhausted with always having to figure out what to do. You can make sure that you're taking breaks, that you're making big decisions after, sleeping, and rather than, late at night after a long day. And then a really key thing that a wise person once told me, it was Amanda, remember that very few decisions are permanent or unchangeable. There's very few decisions we make in life that are permanent, that a decision works until it doesn't. And you're not making the decision, with finality. It's not set in stone. You can likely change it, whatever that decision might be.
Yeah.
Well, that is so helpful. Okay.
Can I just add one thing to that, Ruthie?
Yeah,
just
please.
Related to one of the resources. So, and for those of you who are in work contexts where you're also having to make decisions, whether you have staff, that you're having to direct to do different things, or you're just having to make organizational decisions in your jobs. One of the videos that we're going to link to on the site and that is in the chat now was an excellent, really, like 20-minute webinar put out by Dr. Bruce Perry, where he talked about decision fatigue, not just individually, but in an organization when you're in a leadership role in your particular workplace. And so we just recommend that you check that out along with some of the other decision fatigue resources we'll post that can just help you think some of these cognitive load and decision fatigue type situations and how they might apply to you either at home or at work, which is also at home right now, but in the kinds of things that you're having to wrestle with.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, so let's kind of shift gears and focus on the big decision that so many families are facing right now, what to do about returning to school. Amanda, what can we learn from the research about how parents should go about making these decisions?
Yeah, so I am coming at this particular, I guess, question or even just analysis for myself, maybe from a different lens. So I've been a risk management consultant for the last several years, where I've been in that role helping psychologists make really complex ethical and clinical decisions. And so that's, interestingly, some of the lens I've applied to these decisions we've had to make in our family. So, and part of that, as Lindsay and I have talked about a lot, is there's no perfect or even good choice right now. Which is often the case with really complex decisions, right? Or it would be easy. If there was an easy choice, we would make it. And right now, I think for many of us, it just feels like there's no good choice. We're just deciding in some ways between a rock and a hard place. And there's also no risk-free decision either. No matter which way we're sort of slicing it, there's going to be consequences of some sort. And so those are the kinds of things we're having to weigh. And then when you think about what some of those consequences might be, or what these layers of the decision look like, we have to think about our own contexts and appreciate that we're all dealing with really different contexts, right? So some of us have no choice. You know, your school district has decided maybe only remote or only in person, or there just really is no choice, which interestingly, I know in conversations Lindsay and I have had with friends in other parts of the country, in some ways that's a relief, right? If I don't have to make the choice, it was just made for me, then I'm just left to deal with whatever the consequences are of that, but they don't feel that paralysis of having to make a decision that some others do. So that's one context. Some of you are choosing between 2 or more options. Do I do remote? Do I do in person? Do I do hybrid? You know, what is that going to look like? So you have a number of different options to choose from. Some of you were given a choice by the district, but maybe because you work full time, you don't feel like you have a choice, right? You just don't have the option, even though the option was given to you. Some of us don't have access to resources or technology that would be necessary to maybe opt for remote instruction if you wanted to. Some, I saw my neighbor, Angela, post this, which I just thought was such a lovely perspective, that she's making the choice to stay home to lighten the burden on schools and allow for more space for families who don't have the luxury to make that choice. And so I just thought, like, what a really lovely perspective as she was thinking about kind of the village. And if I can keep my child home, I'm going to try to for a child that then has space in the classroom that can't make that choice. So and on, right? We have so many different contexts we're coming from. And so I think Lindsay and it was really important to us to think about, you know, this is not about judgment and telling you what is right or wrong to do. This is about giving you a way to think about it, to make the right choice for your family right now, which is not going to be the same choice for another family in a different context. So for those of you who are still having to make a choice, I think that doing a sort of risk-benefit analysis can be helpful. And so I just want to talk through a couple basic steps of what that would look like. Be sure you're clear on the actual decision you're making. So is it whether your child should go back to school at all for the whole year? Is it just for the first quarter or for the first couple of weeks? Like, what is the decision you're actually having to make right now? Because it can be helpful to break the decision down into chunks, that I'm not making this decision for the year, but I'm going to say, okay, for the next month, here's what we're going to do. I have talked to the school and understand what my options are if I want to change that after a certain period of time. So break it into chunks around what is necessary to decide right now versus maybe aspects of this that can wait. Things like extracurricular activities or clubs or sports. I may not need to make those decisions just yet. I just need to maybe make this one decision. Like I know, Lindsay, that's what you're wrestling with, right? With a deadline next week. So, you know, what is the decision I have to make right now? And then maybe there are some others that I can hold off for now. So making sure you're clear on what the actual decision is. And then thinking about, you know, what are the actual risks for each option? And I know this is hard to know right now. It's really hard to find clear answers or guidance. Some of the ways to do that are to look at rates in your area. What do the trends look like? Consult with the health department. Victoria's going to post a link there. We'll have some links on our website on places that you can go to for information around how to find what those trends are looking like in your area. Like I said, consult with the health department, with your pediatrician, just talk to them. Look at what experts and medical doctors around you are doing with their kids and how they're making their choices. So make sure you're looking at reputable sources. And again, we'll link to some of those that we've relied on and have found helpful in our own decision-making. And as you're thinking about risk, it's important to consider different domains, for your child related to risk. This isn't just about their physical risk or medical safety or health. There's emotional risk, there's social risk, there's educational risk, right? There's all these domains of development that we're paying attention to for our kids. So those are some of the risks we're thinking about. So then you want to think about what are the benefits of each option. In some ways, most of us now have had a sort of trial run to see how we and our kids are going to respond to these different scenarios. We got to do that between May and March and, say May or June, depending on when your school year might have wrapped up. So I want to just share a couple results from our study, a few relevant things that we learned so far in the families we study. So just give me a second. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, Victoria's got to let me do that. I think enable it for me. Let's try again. There we go. Okay. All right, so hopefully you should be able to see this amazing infographic that Ruthie made. And I'm just going to talk through a couple of these findings. So I'll translate to you what all these fancy graphs are that you're seeing. So first, if you can see my cursor here where I'm moving it around, what we found in our 450 or so families is that parents of younger children, so when I say younger, from kindergarten to 5th grade, reported significantly higher parenting stress at every time point than did the parents of older children, which were 6th to 12th grade. And so our time points were right before we all went to remote learning, or in that first week, 1 week later, 1 month later, and 3 months later. So at every one of those time points, parents who had younger children reported higher stress, as you can see here, than did those with older children. Now, for parents who have children with special needs, which is what you see here in the second graph, their stress was significantly higher than parents who did not have special needs. And so I think, you know, these things probably seem obvious, but they're important for us to take a deeper look at and just try to understand. Approximately 1 in 4 children were rated by parents as having psychosocial impairments between March and June. So in just those several months, we saw about 25% of the kids in our sample experiencing pretty significant psychosocial impairments, okay? So emotional and behavioral issues. Younger children, which is what you can see there at the bottom left, seem to experience more behavioral problems over that 3-month period, whereas older children, okay, so 6th and above, seem to experience more emotional problems. Now, the red line that you see there is showing that in both of these cases, they weren't necessarily clinically significant, so severe psychological symptoms, but we're still concerned about the fact that we're seeing these changes in just a short period of time. So the last thing here is just to kind of pull out in this really cool word cloud. We were asking parents what they're most worried about, and the big words are the things that, of course, people mention the most. And then the smaller words are other things that were mentioned. And so a couple examples, you know, we had parents say, one parent, I'm worried about wanting to make sure my kids feel safe and stable during all the change, but I'm finding myself exhausted and impatient due to work stress. I'm worried that people think homework and testing are more important than well-being. And we also asked the kids what they're worried about. And for a kindergartner, this little one said, I'm worried about family that I love getting sick and not getting to hug anyone. I'm a hugger and I don't know how I can hug anyone anymore. And for a 3rd grader who said, I'm not worried. I know if we stay safe, we will not get it. I love that 3rd grade sort of resilience, like everything's fine, this is great. And looking at how that might change. And then a 7th grader saying, I'm worried that I will get the coronavirus and pass it along to you, meaning their parent. But you might get serious complications or even die, and then I would blame myself for the rest of my life. So these are some of the findings that we've seen so far. We're still diving into a lot of this, but some of these seemed pretty relevant to just thinking about, you know, what we're talking about today. So again, we're looking at those risks and benefits and thinking about what some of this data are teaching us. So are your children younger? What sort of stress are you experiencing as a parent? What kinds of worries does your child have? And so as we think about that, then we start to look at how we make the decision, okay? So we've talked about making sure you understand what the decision is you have to make, thinking about risks across these domains, thinking about benefits, and then making the actual decision. So as Lindsay said, remembering that decisions are changeable, okay? Very few decisions are permanent. Tattoos aren't even permanent anymore, you know, despite what my parents used to try to tell me. So things work until they don't. But there can also, on the flip side, of course, be relief in just making a decision as well, even if it might feel like for a limited period of time. So I just want to give like 2 more tips around this, and then we'll talk about some other stuff I'm sure Ruthie's got queued up for us. So don't make the decision for who your kid was 6 months ago, okay? We have all changed in important ways that we need to factor in. What does this version of my child need right now? Not my child 6 months ago, but what does this version of my child need right now? What can this version of myself as a parent provide right now? Not who I should be, not who I used to be, but who I am right now with everything I'm carrying. What can this version of myself as a parent provide right now? And is this version of my child's school the right fit for this version of my child right now? right? So the decision making and thinking about this is more nuanced than just, should I do this or shouldn't I? And then the last, I guess, reminder I just want to give there around decision making is that if you have more than one child, try to do this analysis that I'm kind of walking you through for each of them individually, rather than as a collective unit. So think about the strengths and needs of each child and try to make the decision that is the best fit for that child's needs right now. And again, I recognize that there's a lot of layers to that. And, we don't all have the capacity or resources to say, okay, well, I'm sending this one to school, but I'm keeping this one home. But it's important to just go through and think about each child individually and what their strengths and needs might be, this version of your child.
Definitely. Thank you so much for talking us through some of those findings and for giving us some tips on kind of juggling and balancing how to weigh some of these decisions. So Lindsay, you're going through this right now and you have to make a decision soon, right? So what are some of the things you're factoring as you're kind of weighing your options? I think you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. So we are in the thick of this right now. Our province just announced the plan for schools last week, and we have until August 12th. And I actually just got a reminder about this about an hour before this webinar started, as if I could forget that I have this looming decision and deadline hanging over me. But thinking about community transmission rates, trying to see what they're like in our area as it gets closer. And also knowing, again, that this isn't final and that a lot can change. We don't start school so that change between now and then, and I can be all the way at that point. But the main thing I'm looking at is about both of my kids and what might be most important for them. And if I have one of them home, for me, it's sort of like, well, maybe might as well just have both of them home. So thinking about a lot of things like that right now.
Awesome. Amanda, how did you decide?
Yeah, so in our district, my kids are actually supposed to go back next week. We're not really sure where the summer flew by, but in our district, we were given the option. There was a whole sort of return to learn plan laid out around all the safety protocols and as well as phases of what it will look like depending, because the rates in our area are unfortunately going up right now. And so we've been watching that pretty closely. And so, I've had lots of really difficult conversations with friends as we're all wrestling this and coming at it from a different place. And one of the things I've really appreciated in my decision-making is this notion of the village, right? And that we're all trying to be really supportive around like making the decision that makes sense for you and your family right now. And here's what makes sense for me. And, just really trying to be supportive around each family trying to make the best decision for themselves. And so we had various considerations. I have, one child who has some significant medical issues. I have another child who, can struggle with some anxiety at different times. And so we're thinking about different things for each of them and what might make sense. And so, and also my husband and I both work, and really it was a nightmare trying to juggle both of our work schedules from home while trying to manage kids at very different developmental stages with different academic demands on their time. And so for us, it was balancing some of the medical risks we have to think about in our home, as well as the social and emotional well-being, which we also could see different just severities of regression at different times, and thinking about for each of them what's most important. And so because we felt comfortable with the protocol at this point that the school is using, we've talked with some of the teachers and administrators around how they feel about going back and whether they feel safe, because that was important to us as well. And feel okay starting them out. But I am anticipating that very soon after we return, we will probably be back to remote learning. So we'll see. I'm hopeful. I really appreciate the careful thought and attention people have tried to give to making these decisions and building these safety protocols. But we'll see. And I think as you've heard Lindsay and I both say a couple times, this is the decision that makes sense for us right now, and it'll work until it doesn't. And 2 days after we go back or try to go back, if we're back home, then we're going to have to work on making some new decisions and figuring out how to manage that. And just one, I think, thing related to that I've watched, with my kids a little bit older who understand what we're trying to decide right now, is just their need for a decision as well, right? Like they asked us a couple weeks ago, you know, when did you get the school supply list? It's time to go school supply shopping. Why aren't we doing that, right? This is our ritual. This is what we usually do this time of year, and it's really fun. And I kept being so ambivalent, like, oh, I don't know when we're going to get it, or yeah, we got it, but I'm not sure. And that was my own ambivalence around trying to make this decision. And we're not really sure if you're going to go back. And I just didn't want them to get excited. And what I neglected to realize there was how much they were needing to have a little bit of control over this, and that they needed us to commit to something, right? And so, look, Mom, if we're going back to school, we need supplies. So let's do this. And so we learned a lot from them around, you know, their need for trying to control some of the little things and the things they enjoy and the rituals we have around school, and that it was our ambivalence and not answering questions that was actually making it worse for them. So I think that's just something to be mindful as parents as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to think about what the child is bringing to the table and kind of what they're thinking about, what they're worrying about when making these decisions.
We do add something real quick.
Yeah,
sorry. And is it still breaking up when I talk, or is it okay?
A little bit, on and off. You're okay right
now. So I just wanted to say another big thing is to think about maybe is age. And we didn't talk a lot about, you know, different developmental stages in this, but I was part of listening to a webinar earlier today that was focused on adolescence. So what your kindergarten child might need, not the same thing, obviously, as what a 15-year-old might need. And so to really think about, you know, the socio-emotional aspects, the mental health, the academic outcomes, and we can post some resources, and hopefully we can also eventually link to that webinar as well, that talks about, you know, how the academic stuff might be easier for the older kids to do, right? That they can do better with the distance learning, and there's some evidence of that. Whereas for the younger kids, that's considerably more difficult, and they require a lot more parental instruction. So, and the adolescents tend to react poorly to the direct parental instruction compared to the littler kids. And so all things to think about when it comes to family functioning. So,
yeah, which is, been part of my, I guess, maybe even a little bit frustration when I've been seeing how some school districts are trying to approach this, kind of similar to, like I talked about siblings, right? Like making this decision about school, about kids returning to school, rather than breaking it down by developmental level and really looking at the research and what we know around what kids need as far as education at different developmental stages. So making a decision for kindergartners through third graders who make such critical developmental progress during that period of time, especially when it comes to education, is a lot different of an analysis than looking at high schoolers who, you know, maybe can work a bit more independently, or thinking about which types of high schoolers might need to go back. And so I think in the decision making we've been seeing at all levels, it tends to we just talk about school, you know, as often this one big decision we're making, as opposed to really thinking about what do kids at different stages need.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We have some really great questions coming in from the audience. So I'm going to kind of pick your guys' brains on a couple questions we have here. So Octavia and Melissa kind of brought up some questions about how can we think about distinguishing effects of being in lockdown versus effects of not being in school. So kind of the idea, are these effects we're seeing due to children being isolated from their peers, or is it due to them kind of lacking this academic instruction versus like the social behavioral piece? So do you guys have any ideas about like how to kind of respond to that, or what the research seems to be showing about kind of what kids need at this point in time?
Lindsay, you want to start, or you want me to start?
You can start.
Okay. I think it's hard to answer that globally, right? Because it depends so much on the child. And so I think it's different for each child, honestly, like what the effects of lockdown might mean for this child with this particular temperament at this developmental stage, as opposed to this child at this other stage. And so I think some of it has to do with, is it social, right? We know that there are some gender differences in terms of what kids need at different developmental stages. We know that some of that has to do with just, again, emotional and mental health and how they're doing, and again, what their different temperaments are like. And so I think it just really depends when we're looking at the effects and why we're seeing different effects, depends a lot on what the child is bringing to the table. And then related to that, at least in our study so far, what we're seeing is it depended a lot on the parents' stress too. And I think that makes perfect sense when I think about, as my stress increased and I saw my kids' emotional and behavioral needs increase, right? Like they are, kind of mirroring themselves to our stress at times. And as parents, I think we often forget that we're co-regulators. So when we're, worked up, our kids can come up to that level. But when our kids are worked up, often we are using ourselves to help bring them down, right? It's why it doesn't work when your child is screaming and you scream back at them, stop yelling at me. Because if we're both yelling, like that's not going to do it. But if you can help to kind of bring them down and use that ability to use yourself to help regulate them back down, that's incredibly helpful. And that's what this dance is that we do with our kids. So as our stress increased and we just didn't have, again, the cognitive capacity for the reasons Lindsay talked about to be able to help manage our own stress. And again, I was there right with you, that our kids are going to come up to that level too, because they're looking to their grownups to help regulate them. And when we're not regulated, which understandably so, it has been very hard for us to be regulated in this too. That's why we're seeing some of their emotional and behavioral fluctuation.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was going to add, just thinking about, there's another kind of concept that I've been thinking about a little bit with this in terms of weighing risk, and that would be something called availability risk. So, we're hearing, can you hear me okay?
A little bit, yeah. It just
okay. Sorry. We're hearing a lot about coronavirus in the news. I mean, that's all we're hearing about, and deaths from it, very tragically. So that's at the forefront of our thinking. But we are making this decision about it. It's not like there are no risks to keeping kids home. I mean, there are risks to socio-emotional development, to mental health, to academic achievement, and learning and purely. So I think that those are not as readily apparent to us because, we're not seeing the news headlines about them every day. But it is important to kind of keep that in mind, that it is not this, that keep in mind like what we are deciding between, if that makes sense.
And I think it would just making me think of another example when you were just talking, Lindsay, like when we think about the dangers of, again, sort of lockdown and what that means for our children regressing, I think it's also important to remember that like you are the expert in your child. Nobody knows your child better than you do. And so to not be afraid to kind of advocate for them too, or make decisions that make sense for them. For one of my kids, he hated the Zoom sessions with his teacher. They caused it, like he's just an introverted kid and he was uncomfortable and he was so worried about like, do I know when to unmute myself at the right time? And it caused him so much distress that at some point, I reached out to his teacher and just said, does he need to? And she said, gosh, not at all. Like they're just there to help. If they want to connect, I'm here for them. If you just want me to meet with him individually. But I didn't do that for several weeks because here I was trying to be the good parent, checking the boxes and, well, my kid is supposed to log in at this time. And she said, oh, I wish you would have told me. Of course he doesn't have to do that if it makes sense. And it was a good lesson for me to advocate and recognize like this is new for all of us. And I don't know how my kids are going to respond to remote learning and how they're each going to respond differently. So to just sort of watch that and make sure there's an open dialogue with your child that they can say to you, like, this is really hard for me, or I don't understand how to do this, or I don't like doing this, and to work together to figure out ways to make that system work for all of you. And not be afraid to advocate for that, because I think teachers really just want to be supportive as well and are trying to put lots of resources out there to be supportive, but they don't know if something's not working for your family if we don't communicate that. And that was a lesson I had to kind of learn the hard way along with my little guy. So
yeah, I feel like that's a very good example. Okay, we have another question from the audience from Laura, who says that there's a lot of fear and anxiety involved in either keeping children home or sending them to school. How can we manage our own fear and anxiety as parents as well as our children's fear and anxiety? I know you guys kind of touched on this a little bit with some tips, yeah. But are there anything specific to kind of how parents can maybe avoid kind of putting their own fear and anxiety on their kiddos?
Lindsay, would you recommend panic scrolling?
Panic scrolling on your phone, and yeah, definitely. That's a term my husband coined about what I was doing in the early days, just panic scrolling on my phone. I don't recommend that. I also recommend limiting media consumption. Even just kind of having the news on in the background, and thinking, oh, your kids aren't really paying attention to it. There's evidence other traumatic events that, even just media exposure can lead to PTSD type symptoms, anxiety. And so it's good to kind of avoid that. And now I've lost my train of thought on what the original, things we can do to manage our own stress and anxiety. Have a good internet connection, because this is causing me quite a lot of stress and anxiety. I think thinking about ways to empower your kids and at different ages as well. So I know, if masks are required, having your kids help you pick out the masks and, what design or fabric they will have, ways of making them feel like they're part of it, and they're empowered. With teenagers, that might look different, but allowing them to have some sort of input on, if they are staying home, well, what is their homeschooling routine like? And even something as simple as what order they're doing things in. I mean, these can help manage anxiety. And a big one that I was thinking about was in our field, that, being prepared for something tends to reduce stress and anxiety. So when children have to testify in court, or when they have to undergo a stressful medical procedure, if they are prepared with knowledge and with understanding what will be expected of them and what they're going to experience, then they actually cope with it much better. So potentially doing like a dry run of school drop off, or getting them to practice doing the kinds of things that they're going to have to do in the classroom, might go a long way with managing their anxiety about starting.
Yeah, and I can't underscore the idea of empowering your kids enough. Again, no matter what age they are. And it could be as little as something like, maybe now we're all sort of at home and trying to adjust, like Lindsay talked about, reduce the number of decisions you have to make, establish a routine. It could be things, especially with younger kids, like, okay, well, what do we want to do first? Most days, do you want to start out with an hour of remote learning and then we do this? But like having them be a part of making some of those decisions can go a long way to helping to reduce some of the stress and anxiety for all of you. So it's not a battle. Like there were mornings I knew I'd wake up and just, I can't believe I'm going to have to fight to get us all through the day to check off all the things we have to do. And when we could like let go of how we wanted to do it and involve them in the decisions, it made all the difference in the world. And so when I also think about our stress and anxiety, a big thing that helped us was, again, even with the fluctuating schedules, but mostly when we were quarantined at home, which we're trying to prepare for again, is instituting this quiet time. Like we were never away from each other. And so with our different temperaments and personalities, some more extroverted, some more introverted, we recognized that all of us are craving that, even if some don't realize it. And so for us, it was easy because we have a 4-year-old who was taking naps. And so we were able to just say, all right, for an hour and a half, this is just quiet in our house. But it's also alone time. It meant separating each of the kids to just have space away from each other, even if they say they don't want to. And for us to have space from them and just reset. It was like a reset every day. And it was amazing. And some days it worked better than others. Some days I was, fighting to get them to stay quiet and follow the guidelines. But, it just really helped us, again, to have that reset period in the middle of our day and allow each of us to kind of check our stress and anxiety and then come back to the second half of the day.
Awesome. Okay, well, I know that we're nearing the end. Do we think we have time for one more question from the audience?
Yeah, maybe.
Sure. Okay, so this kind of came up from a couple people. Callie kind of initiated the question about like what kind of impact will kids have emotionally when school begins with all the restrictions that schools are making? So kind of the idea that it's not really school as it normally is, and how to kind of prepare kids for that difference. And maybe if you guys have any sense of like what that impact might have on kids even.
I find, and I'll be interested to hear if Lindsay agrees with this, but I find that kids are so much more adaptable than we are, right? Like the grownups have a bigger problem with this than the kids do. And they, again, take their cues so much from us. And for many of the kids that I've talked with, including my own, but kids of friends as well, they're just so excited to go back and have some semblance of school for many of them. that, you know, it's like, great, whatever I have to do. And I mean, I'm even seeing the littlest ones adjusting to masks okay. If their parents are setting a tone that, hey, this is exciting, we're going to pick this out, you know, this is something we're all going to get used to, and it means you get to see your friends. And so they really take their cue from us in a lot of ways, but they're also a lot more adaptable than we tend to be. And so I think people would be surprised at their kids adjusting often even better or faster than you anticipate them doing, depending on kind of how we set that up for them. What do you think, Lindsay?
Absolutely. I was going to say the same thing, actually, that I think that they really surprise us a lot of the time with how adaptable and how resilient they are. And the younger ones, how kind of normal it could start seeming right away. And it's not forever. So, you know, they will get back to the old normal. But I think I think they might surprise us. And I think that it's important not to put your own spin on it. And don't assume that, you know, it's going to be bad or scary or negative for them. And so it's important to think about that when doing things like drop-offs and stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Okay, well, so if there was one single takeaway message you'd like to leave parents with, what would you guys say that is from this webinar?
Go ahead, Lindsay.
Me first? Okay.
Yeah.
Get new internet service. No. Mine would be just it works until it doesn't aspect of making the decision that, you know, you've made a lot of really critical decisions about your child's life, and you will continue to do that for, you know, much of their lives. And so this is one of those decisions. You've done it before, and, you know, you can do it this time, and it works until it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think my takeaway, which, you know, maybe this will make some of you cringe, like we have been watching Frozen 2 so much in my house that it has become my mantra to channel Anna, right? Which is to just do the next right thing. Like I just keep trying to do whatever the next right thing is. What's the next decision I have to do? You know, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to tackle today? Just do the next right thing. What is the next right thing? And just focus on that. And like Lindsay said, we have to make lots of really hard decisions for our kids, and this is no different. But at the end of the day, it is, again, what we're sort of modeling, and kids just want to feel safe and secure and know that their grown-ups are going to, you know, be there to take care of them and be with them. And so that's what we're doing, and whatever that looks like for your family.
Awesome. Right. Thank you both so much.
Well, we want to thank everybody for attending our very first webinar in this Pandemic Parenting Exchanges. We will have the resources that have come up on the chat. We will put them on our website, which is pandemic.org. And we'll have, you know, some more things up there for you in the coming weeks. We have a webinar scheduled for Tuesday, August 18th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And that's on talking to kids about COVID-19. We're excited about that. We want to thank Focus Forward Media, who sponsored this webinar. And when I say sponsored, just so there's no confusion, Amanda and I are completely donating all of our time and energy and resources and everything for this. But we are for us to make sure that people who are giving of their time for things like the website and, you know, keeping this all going, the production team are getting paid. And we've been doing that out of our own pockets so far. So we do have a thing set up on our website for donations. If you know of any organizations that might want to sponsor a webinar in the future, that would be amazing. So yeah, that's it from me.
Yeah, we'll be posting more updates and information and resources on social media. So if you go to our website, you can find all of our social media links. And thank you again for joining us. Thank you for being patient with our technological challenges as we work through the kinks the first time. And we really look forward to seeing you at the next one on August 18th. Or if you can't make it, feel free to access the resources and share with anybody who might find the information helpful. So thank you, everybody.